إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So we start today a new series of lessons, and our book, the Risala that we have chosen, is Nawaqid al-Islam. Those things which invalidate or nullify a person's Islam. And this is a short but extremely important treatise in which those things by which a person leaves Islam are made clear, meaning the most important of those affairs. And they have been summarized in 10 issues, in 10 affairs in this treatise. And we are going to rely upon what has been written by Shaykh Ubayd al-Jabiri, حفظه, from the scholars of Medina, and likewise from Shaykh Muhammad Aman al-Jaami, رحمه. And of the two, Shaykh Muhammad Aman's explanation is brief and short, so we'll always begin with that one first. And then we'll move to Shaykh Ubayd al-Jabiri's explanation, which is also concise, but slightly more detailed. So this is the general pattern that we will follow, inshaAllah ta'ala. So to begin, we'll start with the muqaddimah of Shaykh Muhammad Aman, rahimahullah. And after praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and sending salat and salam upon the Messenger of Allah sallallahu, he says, from the most important of things which a Muslim, which is obligatory upon a Muslim to know, to learn, and to spread amongst the people, is that which is connected to the foundations of his religion and his aqidah. So here the Shaykh explains that from the most important obligations upon us is to learn what are the foundations of our religion, and how do those foundations, how do they differ from the foundations of the various other adyan, the other religions, from the deen of the Yahud, for example, the Jews, or the Nasara, for example, the Christians, or the Hindus, for example. This is from the most important and greatest of obligations which is upon us, to know and understand these affairs. What are the usul of our deen? What are the usul, the foundations of our aqidah? However, وَكَذَلِكَ مَا يُنَاقِضُ الْعَقِيدَةَ الصَّحِيحَةَ, and likewise what opposes and contradicts the correct creed, the correct aqidah. So not only must we know what are the usul, what are the foundations of our religion, we must also know that which contradicts them and invalidates them. And this priority, the priority of this knowledge, meaning that this knowledge is the greatest and foremost type of knowledge that we have to be engaged in and to learn and to know. Where do we learn this from? This priority is given in the Quran and the Sunnah itself, because the texts of the Sharia have come with this emphasis upon these affairs, upon this particular affair. And on the basis of that, we see that the scholars, the people of knowledge, they have explained the principles concerning this, the Fawa'id, the foundations concerning this field, this subject area, and they have written on this topic. And from the greatest of that which has been written is this Risala by Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad bin Abdul-Wahhab, rahimahullah ta'ala, and he titled this treatise Nawaqid al-Islam. Nawaqid al-Islam, that which contradicts or invalidates Islam. And as for where these Nawaqid, these nullifiers or invalidators, where they've come from the Quran and the Sunnah. They are derived from the Quran and the Sunnah. And secondly, we see that when you go and look into the books of jurisprudence, the books of fiqh, the books of the Hanafis, the books of the Malikis, the books of the Shafi'is, the books of the Hanbalis, when they look at the issues of fiqh, and in the abwab of fiqh, you see that they deal with, for example, tahara, purification, the prayer times, the prayer details itself, fasting, hajj, marriage, divorce, and they look at all of the various subject areas. Then they dedicate a chapter to do with those things which invalidate Islam. So, for example, they might have a title called Babur Riddah, Bab Hukm al-Murtad, chapter on apostasy, chapter on the ruling of the apostate. And so they include this topic within their books. Now, this topic is only in the books of jurisprudence because it is there and it has a basis in the Quran and the Sunnah itself. Right? So this now is a branch of that which is in the book and the Sunnah. So, after stating this, Shaykh Muhammad Aman, Rahimahullah, he says, فَمَعْرِفَةُ نَوَاقِدِ الْعِبَادَةِ مِنْ أَعْظَمِ أَسْبَابِ السَّلَامَةِ مِنَ الْوُقُوعِ فِيمَا يَقْدَحُ فِيهَا أَوْ يُبْطِلُهَا بِالْكُلِّيَّةِ. He says, so therefore, having knowledge of those things which invalidate a person's worship, meaning make your worship to be of no effect, then this is from the greatest of the causes or reasons for having safety, for being safe in your religion from falling into that which either harms your religion, so it disfigures your religion, or it invalidates it altogether. It invalidates it altogether, removes it altogether. And then the Shaykh gives a good example, a good parable by which we can relate to what is being said. He says, for example, to have knowledge of those things which invalidate your wudu'. What are the things which make your wudu' to be invalidated? To have knowledge of this is extremely important for a Muslim, because a person who does not know what invalidates his wudu', and then he prays, his wudu' could be invalidated, he doesn't know because he's ignorant, and then he prays, and his prayer is actually batil. It's not acceptable to Allah because it missed a condition of acceptability, which is that a person must be upon tahara, must be upon purity. And that's because of his ignorance. And so when this is the case for ibadah, the prayer, for example, then to know the Nawaqid of Islam itself, the nullifies of Islam itself, then this is even greater. It's even greater because it comes first. And a person, it's more important than knowing the Nawaqid of al-wudu', of purification, because the person whose Islam becomes invalidated, then no action whatsoever will be accepted from him. So whatever good deed he does, because its foundation is not upon the Tawheed of Allah and upon Islam, then that deed will not be accepted because his Islam has been invalidated. Therefore, in light of this introduction, the Shaykh finishes by summarizing that there are four things which are upon us. First of all, we must know إذن لا بد من معرفة نواقض الإسلام. First of all, it is vital that we have knowledge of the nullifiers of Islam. What nullifies a person's Islam? والتحقق من هذه النواقض. And secondly, to verify these nullifiers. Are they proven? Are they established from the Quran and the Sunnah? Are they validated? Is this actually a nullifier? Because some people can claim that such and such a thing, it nullifies your Islam. But in reality, is that case? Is that so? Or is it something that's actually only minor disbelief or minor shirk, for example? So we have to verify and make sure and ascertain that yes, indeed, this is a nullifier of Islam. Thirdly, to understand them. So we understand these nullifiers, we understand them. And fourthly, to seek aid with Allah. ثم الاستعانة بالله في عدم الوقوع فيها. And then to seek aid from Allah in not falling into them. So these are the four basic ways that we approach this topic. We see there's ilm, knowledge, understanding of that knowledge, and there's amal, there's acting upon what we are learning as well. So this is the intro of Shaykh Muhammad Aman al-Jaami, rahimahullah. And as for the introduction of Shaykh Ubayd al-Jabiri, حفظه, it is very short, and there's really only a point or two that we will take from it, inshallah ta'ala. So after beginning with the praise of Allah and testifying that there is none which has a right to be worshipped except Allah, and sending a salat and salam upon the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Shaykh says to proceed, then indeed the leading scholars of knowledge and Iman, the leading scholars of Ahlul Sunnah, the people of the Sunnah and the Jama'ah, starting from the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam up until whenever Allah wills. So meaning that this is an ongoing affair, something that will not stop. So from the time of the companions up until, in essence, Yawm al-Qiyamah, prior to Yawm al-Qiyamah, that the people of knowledge in all of this time period, which is obviously the past, from the time of the companions, the present now in our time, and likewise in the future, that they have never restricted themselves in simply speaking about the Sunnah and worship and dealings and behaviors. Right? So in other words, when we look at their da'wah, we look at what they are engaged in, they don't just speak and teach just about ibadah and dealings between the people and suluk, which is behaviors and traits and characteristics. They don't restrict themselves only to this. Rather, alongside teaching this, they would also warn against what invalidates the religion completely, or it negates its perfection, the perfection which is obligatory upon every person to perfect his religion to an obligatory level. This is because in the deen, there's basically three levels. Let's say there's three levels. The first is the actual validity of the religion itself. Is a person's deen valid or not? This is now to do with the validity. Is your deen valid? Is it founded upon the Tawheed of Allah, singling Him out in worship, the absence of things which nullify your Islam? This now is the validity. Are you actually in Islam or outside of Islam? Then within Islam, there is an obligatory level of perfection. Every person has to have perfection in his religion, which is wajib. Now this varies from person to person, and Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah explains this in his book Kitab al-Iman. This is what we call Kamalul Iman al-Wajib. Kamalul Iman al-Wajib. There's an obligatory level of perfection. And this means that whatever is in the limits of your knowledge of that which is wajib and that which is unlawful for you to do, then you must bring all of that. Right? And this will vary from person to person. Not every person has the same level of knowledge. There are some people who don't know that certain things, for example, may be unlawful, or certain things, for example, might be obligatory. They don't have that knowledge. But when that knowledge comes to them, it now becomes wajib upon them to complete their religion by acting upon those wajibat or keeping away from those muharramat, those things which are unlawful. So there are certain things, and then after this there is the recommended level of perfection. A level of perfection which is mustahab, kamalul mustahab, which means those things which a person, if you leave them, they don't, make your religion deficient, they don't make you sinful, they don't mean that you have fallen short. It means that if you do them, you'll get rewarded, your religion will be more complete, more perfect. But if you don't do them, then your religion is still wajib, is perfect in the wajib sense, because you've brought all of those things. So these are three levels. Now, when we are speaking about things which oppose the deen, then the scholars of Islam, they explain either those things which completely nullify Islam from its very beginning, from its very foundations, or those things which actually make a person's deen to be deficient and fall short of that which is obligatory for him to the perfection which is obligatory. So we see that the scholars from the time of the Sahaba, in this time of ours, and likewise they will continue, for as long as Allah wills, they will continue explaining these types of affairs. What invalidates a person's deen and what makes his deen to be deficient in a manner that he will be punishable for that, because it's deficient from that which is obligatory for him to bring. Now, when the scholars explain all of this knowledge, they are taking it and they are depending upon the Quran and the Sunnah. This is where it is coming from, the Quran and the Sunnah. Evidence from the Quran and from the Sunnah. And likewise, we see that the scholars, they take from this and they explain it to the people. Now in history, we know historically, we can give a number of examples to show of prominent examples where scholars have been known to stand up for the truth and to defend the truth in a time when the foundations of the religion were basically undermined, or people tried to undermine. So let's give 3 or 4 examples. First example is Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And when the Messenger of Allah when he passed away, there were many of the Arabs from the desert Arabs, and they were actually upon nifaq, they were upon hypocrisy. Many of these people, they accepted Islam because everybody else in the peninsula had accepted Islam. And so they made a show of accepting Islam, but inwardly really they were concealing disbelief. So when the Messenger of Allah when he passed away, these tribes and these factions, they came out and they thought that they could basically they thought they had strength, and they thought that they could undermine Islam. So Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and some of them, they refused to adhere to some of the great symbols of Islam, like giving the zakah and things like this, and they began to say, well, we're not obliged to give it to you. So Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he fought against them, because this thing that they were upon was a nullifier of Islam. And had he not fought against them, then, this revolt and this Nawaaqid, this nullifier of Islam, then it would have been taken as something that's okay. And the deen would have been undermined by way of that. That's one example of the striving of the scholars in this regard. Second example is the example of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala in the 3rd century. And Imam Ahmad, what happened in the 150 years before him was that there came into Islam this poison of Greek philosophy, of philosophical baggage and concepts, and people began to speak about Allah, His names, His attributes, on the basis of this philosophical baggage, this nonsense. And as a result of that, they began to undermine some of the greatest symbols of the Islamic Aqidah. So for example, they began to deny that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above His throne, above the heaven, that He's high above everything. They began to deny that Allah Azza wa Jal has names or attributes. Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Rahmah, Al-Hakim, Hikmah, wisdom, mercy, and so on and so forth. They began to deny that He will be seen in the hereafter by the believers. They began to deny that Allah has speech, which is His actual speech. They began to deny that the Quran is actually the uncreated spoken word of Allah Azza wa Jal. They began to deny all of this. So really, the direction it was going was that Allah is really no thing. They were reducing Allah to nothing, because anything which does not have attributes cannot have any existence, really. And so they were pushing this into the hearts of the people. And what happened is they even affected the rulers of the time. So they pushed these beliefs until the rulers were affected by them, and they made the rulers to impose these beliefs upon the people. And they held inquisitions, they held trials, and they slaughtered many, many thousands of of scholars, people of the Sunnah, people of Hadith, who were brought in chains, they were imprisoned, they were brought in, and they were told to say the Quran is created, and they would refuse, and they would be slaughtered. Thousands of them. So Imam Ahmad was from those scholars who was brought, and he stood and he argued with these innovators, these deviants, in front of the rulers, in the courts of the rulers. And Allah Azza wa Jal aided him and supported him. And he explained that this disbelief has no foundation in the Quran and the Sunnah. They beat him, they imprisoned him, and so on and so forth. But eventually, because of his steadfastness, he came out on top. And as a result of that, we today are able to hold on to this creed, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He aided Imam Ahmad in standing up to these people. So he explained it is a Nawaqid of Islam to deny the attributes of Allah, to claim that the Quran is created, to claim that Allah will not be seen in the hereafter, to claim that Allah Azza wa Jal is not above His throne, above the heavens. All of this, it negates a person's Islam. So he made that clear. And that's another example of a scholar. A third example would be Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah Rahimahullah, 7 centuries after the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And what he did was those lots of evil beliefs that appeared and they spread within the Muslim nation by the 7th century. There were people who believed, for example, that the saints and the righteous people, they are able to take revelation directly from Allah, and that they were superior to the prophets, and that the prophets are dead, whereas their saints are living, and they take revelation directly from the living. Right? These are ideas amongst the extreme Sufis. Or some of them believe, for example, that everything is just one. There's no such thing as Allah and His creation. Rather, everything is Allah. Everything that exists is Allah. And they push this belief amongst the people. And again, this is the greatest type of kufr and shirk. So Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, he wrote against these people, and he exposed their false beliefs and explained their origins, and he stood and he clarified those things which invalidate a person's Islam from the actual usul of Islam itself. And fourth example is the author of the book that we are looking at right now, Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad bin Abdul-Wahhab Rahmah ta'ala. And in his time there were people who reverted to worshipping trees, worshipping idols, worshipping saints, calling upon them, sacrificing animals to them, and falling into all of these things which opposes the deen of the messengers. And so he called to Tawheed, he taught the common people Tawheed, he called them to rely upon Allah, make their hearts attached to Allah, to invoke Allah, to seek aid from Allah and rescue from Allah in times of hardship and difficulty. And so he brought this rectification in the society. And when he began this call, then those who were threatened by this call, from those people who, because false religion, there are people who benefit from false religion. False religion, there are people who economically benefit from false religion, right? Because they promise the common people, they promise them easy salvation. And then they manipulate them, and they build false religion, they subjugate them, they exploit them, and they make money from them. Like people when they go, for example, to these tombs and mausoleums, right? And they are told that if you donate money for this wali who's in the grave, or if you sacrifice, then your affairs in this world, they will be kept aright. Your illnesses will disappear, and your businesses will thrive, and you will be given children and plenty, and so on and so forth. And so long as you remain attached to them, your affairs will be straight. And so long as you keep away from them, then your affairs will end up in turmoil. So they tell this to the people, the ignorant, gullible people who lack knowledge. And then around this whole thing, these people, they benefit economically. They exploit these people. They make thousands and millions, right, from being self-appointed keepers and guards, and it's a whole racket that's going on. So whenever people call to Tawheed and call the people to become attached to Allah, then there are those people whose interests are threatened. And so in the time, just like the Messenger of Allah with the kuffar of Quraysh, it's the same pattern everywhere. And so when Shaykh al-Islam, when he began to call to this da'wah, he never initiated violence against anyone. Rather, as soon as he began to put this Tawheed into the hearts of the people, then this is when the enmity, then it now appeared. So, those people, those scholars who would become rooted in these ways and who were blind followers of the madahib, and they were upon this, form of tasawwuf and this type of extreme tasawwuf and practices of shirk and going to the graves, then they mobilized against Shaykh al-Islam. And they then began to tell lies to the rulers, to the Ottomans. And they began to say, this man is killing people, he's declaring everyone, the whole ummah, to be disbelievers, and he's doing this and he's doing that and whatever else. And then they basically mobilized the Ottomans to come and to start, initiating violence. And so only in response to that violence did he then defend himself and, defend his call and clarify his call. And all of this is very, very clear when you look and you go back and you study the letters and the rasail and so on and so forth of the Shaykh and of his offspring. So the point coming to back to the this point from the introduction, the point that we were making then was that from the time of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum to this day of ours, and continuing in the future till whenever Allah wills, there will always be scholars who are clarifying not only the usul, the foundations of our religion that we affirm, but also whatever contradicts and invalidates those usul and those foundations. And I'll give you 4 prominent examples of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, and Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad bin Abdul-Wahhab rahimahullah ta'ala. And this is something that continues. Like in our time, we have Shaykh Abdul Aziz bin Baz rahimahullah, Shaykh al-Albani, Shaykh Muhammad bin Salih al-Uthaymeen, and Shaykh al-Fawzan, and many of the scholars who are present in our time. They are doing the same thing. They are clarifying Tawheed from Shirk, Sunnah from Bid'ah, Kufr from Iman, because this is part of our way. We establish the truth and we invalidate falsehood. So that's the point that we take from just a 1-page, 2-page introduction from Shaykh Ubayd, al-Jabiri, حفظه. So beginning with the text now, we start with the text. And Shaykh al-Islam, Muhammad bin Abdul-Wahhab, rahimahullah, he says, and we begin the treatise, قال المصنف رحمه الله اعلم أن نواقض الإسلام 10 نواقض. اعلم أن نواقض الإسلام 10 نواقض. Have knowledge. So the author, rahimahullah, he said, have knowledge, i'lam, have knowledge that the nullifiers of Islam are 10 nullifiers. Shaykh Muhammad Aman al-Jaami rahimahullah, he says, يقول المؤلف rahimahullah, the author says, i'lam anna nawaqid al-Islam 10 nawaqid. Know, have knowledge that the nullifiers of Islam are 10 nullifiers. The Shaykh says, al-ilm. What is al-ilm? Because the Shaykh, he first of all commanded, i'lam, have knowledge. Have knowledge. So first question that comes to mind then is, what is knowledge? What is the definition of knowledge? And this should be noted, knowledge, al-ilm, huwa idraku shay ala ma huwa alayh. Idraku shay ala ma huwa alayh. Knowledge is to idraku shay, to basically perceive and know something, to perceive and fathom something upon what it actually is, upon the reality that it actually is. This now is actual knowledge. To perceive and to grasp and to fathom and to know something upon the reality that it actually is upon its actual reality. This now is knowledge, because your knowledge agrees with the actual reality. And what this tells us is that not everyone who claims to possess knowledge actually has knowledge, ilm, right? Because whatever ilm they have doesn't agree with the actual reality. So that therefore now is not knowledge. So This, first of all, then, is the definition of knowledge. To have knowledge, idraku shay ala ma huwa alayh. And so the Shaykh says that Shaykh here is encouraging the student of knowledge to have complete understanding of the Nawaqid of Islam. This is what he means, therefore, when he says, i'lam anna Nawaqid al-Islam asharatu Nawaqid. When he says to you, have knowledge that the nullifies of Islam, what is he saying to you? He's saying to you, know the reality of these nullifiers as they actually are. Have actual knowledge which concords with the reality of the affair. So, he's encouraging the student of knowledge to understand and grasp these things which invalidate your Islam, and to know that they can be summarized and encompassed in these 10 affairs. So he mentioned 10 affairs. Now these 10 affairs, where is this number taken from? And the Shaykh says, وَأُخِذَ هَذَا الْعَدَدْ بِالْإِسْتِنْبَاطِ وَالْإِسْتِنْتَاجِ وَالْإِسْتِقْرَاءِ. He says that these 10, where has this number 10 come from, and why 10? This 10 has been taken from basically al-istiqra, which is that when you look at all of the texts of the book and the sunnah from beginning to end, and you study them, and you make istinbat, you study them, you analyze them, you make connections, you make deductions, you look at everything, and from all of that, from the sum of that comprehensive analysis of all of the texts, then you can conclude, or you conclude, that all of the nullifiers of Islam, they come back down to 10 affairs. And whatever is a nullifier of Islam, then it will enter into one of these 10 things in one way or another, in one form or another. And for that reason, we see that the scholars, when they explain the nullifiers of Islam, they mention many nullifiers, and they will go into detail in some of them, and many nullifiers will enter into one of these, into one particular category. So the 10 categories, and so for example, many instances of shirk, for example, different manifestations of shirk will come into the first nullifier that we're going to look at. And then there are other types to do with, for example, magic or something else, and they will fall into another category, right? So all of those things which invalidate Islam, then they can be returned to these 10 which are mentioned here, which are alluded to here by Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad bin Abdul-Wahhab. And he says that they do not, لا تخرج عن هذا العدد. They do not go outside of this number. So the Shaykh then says, he tells us in light of this what is desirable for a student of knowledge to do. فينبغي لطالب العلم فهم هذه النواقد. So it's desirable upon a student of knowledge, first of all, to فهم هذه النواقد, to understand these nawaqid, these nullifiers, and to secondly to avoid them. First of all, to understand them, fahm, to have understanding of them. Secondly, tajannub, which is to avoid them. Thirdly, وَتَعْلِيمُهَا لِلنَّاسِ, and thirdly, to teach them to the people. Understand them, avoid them, and then teach them to the people. Teach them to your families, teach them to your children, teach them to your parents, teach them to those who are under your authority, teach them to the people, spread them, because this is the maqsood, this is the intent. The intent is to spread this knowledge amongst the people. So, and then the Shaykh says something else. A person begins with فَيَبْدَأُ بِالتَّعَلُّمِ وَالدِّرَاسَةِ. You begin by learning and study. You begin with this first. You do not begin with criticizing first. You can't go and start criticize what you might think or presume to be a naqid from the Nawaqid of Islam. The knowledge comes first, and then the intiqad, meaning that when you criticize and you explain that this is kufr, this is Iman, this is Tawheed, this is Shirk, that comes afterwards. You can't speak without knowledge. You can't criticize without knowledge. Knowledge and study comes first, and intiqad, it comes after ilm, after knowledge. Because al-ilm qabla al-qawli wal-amal. Knowledge comes before action. before speech and action. Before you speak, before you act, knowledge has to come first. And this is our way. This is the way that we follow. So, اعلم أن نواقض الإسلام عشرة نواقض. Have knowledge that the nullifiers of Islam are 10 nullifiers. Then he says, الناقض الأول, and what we'll do is we'll go through the first naqid from the speech of Shaykh Muhammad Aman, and then we'll go back to the speech of Shaykh Ubayd al-Jabiri, حفظه الله, inshallah ta'ala. So the first naqid, الناقض الأول الشرك في عبادة الله. قال تعالى إن الله لا يغفر أن يشرك به ويغفر ما دون ذلك لمن يشاء. The first nullifier, shirk in the worship of Allah, meaning to give partners in worship to Allah, to worship someone else alongside Allah. قال تعالى, the Most High, He said, indeed Allah does not forgive that partners should be set up with Him, meaning in worship, but He forgives whatever is less than that to whomever He wills. So the Shaykh comments and he says, قال المصنف رحمه الله, then he quotes this section, الأول الشرك في عبادة الله, shirk in the worship of Allah. So the Shaykh explains that shirk in the worship of Allah, then this is in relation to everything which enters into the worship of Allah. Everything which is ibadah. It is possible for a person to fall into shirk with respect to everything that comes into ibadah. Why is this? It is because a person, first of all, has to have ikhlas. He has to be sincere. That you make your ibadah sincerely, that you're doing it only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is possible for a person not to be sincere in his worship. And it could be in any act of worship. So therefore, a person, in relation to everything which is to do with ibadah, then he must be upon ikhlas, he must be upon sincerity, and he must be upon mutaba'ah, al-mutaba'ah. He must follow and worship Allah in the way that He has been commanded. Right? Al-ikhlas wal-mutaba'ah. So the point the Shaykh is making here really is that shirk can take place with respect to everything which enters into worship. Everything which comes under the definition of worship, a person can fall into shirk in relation to that. To illustrate what is meant. First of all, we know that we have to direct actions of worship to Allah. So, for example, if a person, he sacrificed an animal, let's say he did an act of sacrifice, but who did he do it for? He did it for a saint who is buried in a grave, right? Here now, his action, this act of worship, he has now given it to someone else alongside Allah, right? This now is shirk. It's a major shirk, because he's done an act and he's done an act of worship and he's directed it to other than Allah. This is one level of shirk. But now let's imagine that a person, he actually sacrifices. He's doing a sacrifice, but he's doing it for Allah Azza wa Jal. So let's say he's sacrificing a lamb or a cow or something, or a camel, right? And he's not doing it to other than Allah. He's doing it for Allah. But then he has a motive of wanting to be praised for this action, right? He wants the people to see, look at this guy, he sacrificed a whole cow, how generous this man is, and whatever else, right? This is really what he's thinking inside. The action is for Allah, right? There's no shirk like in the first example, right? Whether in the first example, the guy is taking an animal, he's sacrificing it, and in his heart, he's hoping and fearing in the person who's in the grave because he wants some benefit from him, right? And so he's giving that worship to that person. This is not like this now, right? That is now shirk akbar. This guy, he's sacrificing and he's directing it to Allah. But in his ikhlas, in his sincerity, is he being sincere in doing that? Right? What he's really intending is he's wanting that the people praise him, and he wants to be seen, and praised and heard for this. This now is also shirk. This now is shirk or riya. This is the shirk of riya when you show off. Right? The action is directed to Allah, but he's not sincere in that action. He wants praise from the people rather than be rewarded by Allah. That's his problem here. So this is also shirk, but it's not like the shirk of the first person. So this shows that no matter what action it is in Islam, everything which enters into ibadah, it is possible for a person to fall into shirk in relation to that. Whether it is minor shirk, like in this example, or whether it is major shirk, like in that example. Right? This is what the Shaykh is saying. Al-awwal, so he says, قال المصنف رحمه الله الأول الشرك في عبادة الله في عبادة الله من حيث الإخلاص والمتابعة. In the worship of Allah from the angle of ikhlas, sincerity, and mutaba'ah, following the messenger, and in everything which enters into the obedience to Allah, which is those things which he commanded and those things which he ordered to be kept away from. قال تعالى, قال الله تعالى, he quotes the ayah, إن الله لا يغفر أن يشرك به ويغفر ما دون ذلك لمن يشاء. Indeed, Allah does not forgive that partners are set up with him in worship, but he forgives what is less than that to whomever he wills. Now in this ayah, the Shaykh says, Allah does not forgive the one who associates partners with him. Meaning, the one who dies upon that. لِمَنْ مَاتَ عَلَى الشِّرْكِ الْأَكْبَرِ. For the one who dies upon al-shirk al-akbar. So whoever dies upon shirk akbar, Allah will not forgive him. Allah will not forgive such a person. But as for the one who repents, even if he is at the end of his life and the soul, when the soul is being removed, the soul hasn't reached the throat, because the soul, as it comes out, at the point at which it reaches the throat here, before that time, as the person is dying, before it reaches this point, before it's taken out, that person can still repent. He can still make tawbah. He can still say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. وَأَشْهَدُ أَنَّ مُحَمَّدٌ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ. He can say that. And, he will be forgiven. His repentance will be accepted. So either before the death rattle, before it reaches his throat, or before the sun rises from the west. The sun rises from the west, from that direction, and comes this way. Right, before these two things happen, then repentance is acceptable, no matter what crime you committed. Even if it is shirk with Allah Azza wa Jal. Even if it is shirk with Allah Azza wa Jal. So, basically the point being that Allah forgives every sin, including shirk and kufr is forgiven. But this verse, when it says, indeed Allah will not forgive, it is speaking about the person who dies upon disbelief. And the person who dies upon shirk, right? This person will not be forgiven. Otherwise, these sins, Allah forgives all sins. Now, as for minor shirk, because we spoke earlier about minor shirk, this is shirk that a person does which does not reach the level where it expels him from Islam. The Shaykh says, as for minor shirk, and we'll explain what this is inshallah ta'ala, he says the ruling upon this person is that he is simply a sinful person. He's a sinner. He does not now go outside of the bounds of Islam. He's just a sinful person. He's a sinful person from the people of Tawheed. And if Allah wills, He will forgive him. And if Allah wills, He will punish him. He will be under the will of Allah Azza wa Jal. And so the Shaykh then gives an example. He says, for example, we know that in many towns, in many villages, in many cities, in towns, villages, there are people who they follow this habit of just swearing by other than Allah. Right? These are ignorant people. And because everybody's doing it and it's become a custom, they will say, I swear by so-and-so. I swear by so-and-so person that, I'm speaking the truth. I swear by so-and-so person that, yes, these goods which I'm selling to you, they are such and such. Right? Just habitually swearing by other than Allah. Right? Now this person, when he's doing this out of a habit and his heart is not really venerating the person that he is swearing by, right? There's no ta'zeem in his heart, right? There's no muhabba and khawf and raja. There's no like love, fear, hope associated with that person with respect to whom he's swearing, right? When none of this is present, it's just like a habit that is being said because other people are saying it, and he just says it without thinking. This now is not major shirk. This is not major shirk. This is, this is a shirk al-asghar, and this person is sinful, and it does not take him outside the fold of Islam. But as for when a person is actually venerating the one whom he's swearing by, and he says, for example, I swear by so-and-so, such and such, that such and such. And what he means by this, that, he, in his heart, he's fearful that, if he's not truthful, that person, that shaykh, that wali, is going to punish him. Right? He's fearful that punishment might come to him. Right? Or he's got these states and emotions in his heart, or he's venerating, he's glorifying the one whom he's swearing by. That in his heart there's ta'zeem, right? Veneration, like there should be for Allah. And he says, I swear by Allah, I swear by so-and-so wali. And in his heart there is like ta'zeem, like we should have for Allah. When we say, I swear by Allah. And we swear by Allah because our hearts, they venerate Allah. They make ta'zeem of Allah. They love Allah. In the heart there is hope in Allah. There's fear in Allah. All these actions are present. Right? So when a person, he swears by other than Allah, and in his heart are these things, this now is a shirkul akbar. This is major shirk. This makes a person to be a disbeliever. Right? So this is the tafsil that the scholars have given with respect to swearing by other than Allah. It can either be like a major sin, a minor form of shirk, or it can be a major shirk. It takes you outside the fold of Islam. So the point being that there are actions which do not enter into major shirk. They are minor shirk. And a person is sinful for doing that. And he will, if Allah wills, he will forgive him. And if he wills, he will punish him. But eventually he will be, even if he's punished, then he will be taken out of the fire. He is not a disbeliever in that sense. So the point being that in this verse, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَغْفِرُ أَن يُشْرَكَ بِهِ وَيَغْفِرُ مَا دُونَ ذَلِكَ لِمَنْ يَشَاءُ. This verse is speaking about major shirk. But that does not mean that shirk cannot happen in other actions and be a minor form of shirk for which a person is also punished without him being a disbeliever. Is that clear? That's clear, yeah? So then the Shaykh goes on to give a second example. Also from these examples is from the Shirk al-Asghar, is al-Riya. Al-Riya al-Amali al-Khafif, which is when you do actions to show off. When people do actions to show off, to win praise from the people, to be recognized. A person, for example, who is charitable and kind and gives lots of charity, or someone who's teaching and knowledgeable, or someone who's a skilled reciter of the Quran, right? These are a person's motivations. And this is minor shirk when it happens only in some actions. Happens every now and then. It's minor shirk. But if this is happening in all of a person's actions, or the majority of the person's actions, this person is a disbeliever with nifaq, with hypocrisy. Because this is the way of the hypocrites. The way of the hypocrites, all of their actions are for show. None of them are for Allah, or the majority of them are for show. This is the way of the hypocrites, in whose hearts there is no iman. So we are not talking about that because that is disbelief. We are speaking only here of what happens every now and then. A person falls into an instance of riya. He does a good deed, gives charity, whatever, and he's wanting in that to be praised and recognized by people. This is what we are speaking of. This is also from minor shirk. And likewise, it can also be in terms of speech, in terms of words, when a person, he says, a person, for example, let's say there's a burglary taking place, and it just so happens that someone comes, right? Someone visits you in the house, and the burglar runs and disappears, and you say, gosh, if it wasn't for you, then this burglar would have burgled my house. This statement now is a statement of minor shirk. Because really, if it wasn't for Allah, who decreed for that person to come to your house at that time, then the burglar would have obviously done whatever he did. But by you saying, if it wasn't for you, then you are now, this is like a minor type of shirk. You should really say, if it wasn't for Allah first, and then for you coming, then the burglar would have done what he did. So even in our speech, in our statement, we can say statements which are statements of minor shirk that do not expel a person from Islam, but they are sinful statements. So the point being, shirk is major shirk and minor shirk. And under minor shirk, there are many things that the scholars discuss. So the person who dies upon major shirk, he will not be forgiven. The person who dies upon minor shirk, then we don't say that this person will never be forgiven. We say that this person, he's under the will of Allah. If Allah wills, He will forgive him. If Allah wills, He will punish him. But the one who is not forgiven is the one who dies upon kufr or upon shirk. Because this takes him outside the fold of Islam. Right? So the one who dies, now even if he ascribes to Islam, the one who dies, he's calling upon a wali. Oh wali so-and-so, save me, help me, aid me. He's making this dua, this isti'ana to other than Allah. And he dies upon this. And the one who, he worships Allah with things which are actual worship. This is the person who will die as a non-Muslim and he will not be forgiven. And such a person should not be, we don't make istighfar for him and Allah will not forgive him because he died upon that which cannot be forgiven by Allah Azza wa Jal. So whether the Shaykh gives examples of types of major shirk, al-istighatha bighayrillah, to seek rescue from other than Allah, to humble oneself to other than Allah, to give the shirk of muhabba, to have like such attachment in the heart, love, that should only be given to Allah. You have this type of attachment to other than Allah. Or shirk al-tashri' of legislation, where someone believes that other than Allah's legislation is superior or better or more befitting and so on and so forth, things like that. And all of these such people who fall into this type of shirk, then they die as disbelievers and forgiveness is not sought for them and Allah will not forgive them. And so this brings us to, inshallah, we'll stop at this point because we have just a little section left to go through. We'll conclude that next week, inshallah. Also, we'll conclude our first lesson here on the first nullify of Islam. And we'll take this up, inshallah ta'ala, in the next lesson. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een.